Racism is a sin, but so is slander, so is calumny, so is spreading Marxist ideology under the banner of justice. And yeah, some Catholic voices are doing that. They're doing just that. You know, I recently read in the Florida Catholic, which is a Catholic newspaper that covers the whole state of Florida. And each diocese, I guess, puts its own spin on things and its own additions into it. And I read the Diocese of Venice edition of it. And in that edition, there was an article by Our Sunday Visitor. I had heard of Our Sunday Visitor. I knew absolutely nothing about it. To be honest with you, I thought it was a Mormon publication. That'll show you how much I know about it. But you're not going to believe this article. This article is horrendous. It's reprehensible, and it's put out by a Catholic magazine and then put into a Catholic newspaper. The title of the article was "The Catholic Church and Racism, 5 Years After George Floyd," written by unknown people from Our Sunday Visitor. Usually, if there's no byline with the writer's name right underneath the title, it's usually an opinion piece put out by the editors, but nowhere in this does it say it's an opinion piece. This is put out as a factual report, and it's mind-blowing. Wait till you hear this. It's not a long article. I'm going to read it real quick, and I'm going to pepper in my comments. You're not going to believe this. But just a tiny little background on Our Sunday Visitor. It was founded in 1912 by a priest. At first, it was Orthodox, it was conservative, and deeply loyal to the magisterium. Over the years, though, it's taken that leftward turn, and now apparently it's a liberal rag, just like the National Catholic Reporter. Some call it the National Catholic Distorter. But with this article, you know, articles like this, they have a tendency to conflate racial pain with political activism, and they assume guilt without evidence. And you'll see that they did this in this article. And they treat Catholic moral theology as flexible at best. But without further ado, I'm going to get into the article itself. And like I said, I'm going to read it. And as we go along, I'll make my comments on it. I mean, just the first paragraph alone is enough to make you sick. 5 days after the police-involved Memorial Day murder of George Floyd in 2020, Bishop Mark J. Seitz of El Paso, Texas, major leftist, knelt in El Paso's Memorial Park amid a group of priests, closed his eyes, and prayed. He held a white rose and a sign with simple lettering, "Black Lives Matter." We'll get into that. A photo of the moment spoke volumes to those seeking solidarity from Catholic leaders amid the national grief, anger, and turmoil that followed Floyd's May 25th death amid an arrest for passing a counterfeit $20 by 4 Minneapolis police officers. 5 years later, there is much work still to be done in the church to address the sin of racism, says Bishop Seitz. So I think pretty much everybody knows the story about George Floyd or whatever. But the narrative that's out there in the media is just like what it says here. On the evening of May 25th, 2002, a white officer named Derek Chauvin knelt on the neck of 46-year-old Floyd, who was black, as Floyd laid handcuffed on the ground, repeating that he couldn't breathe and calling for his mother. Chauvin continued kneeling on Floyd's neck after he lost consciousness, even amid calls from the gathered crowd to help Floyd. An officer checked for Floyd's pulse, found none, but no officer gave medical aid. Floyd was later pronounced dead at a local hospital. Chauvin was found guilty of murder in 2021. The other officers were convicted of lesser related charges. The officer's indifference to Floyd's suffering was immediately understood as racially motivated. Really? By who? By whom? Who thought it was racially motivated, and why? You know, I love how that article just assumes a racial component to this, and then just kind of glosses over. Well, it was assumed that it was, or it was understood. A better word would have been assumed that it was racially motivated. But right off the bat, I'd like to ask, where is there any evidence whatsoever this was racially motivated? Where? It wasn't ever introduced by the prosecution. Prosecution never made that claim that it was racially motivated. And you don't think that they did a deep dive into Derek Chauvin and his background and the other officers and their backgrounds? Not one racist utterance was ever found to have been made by Chauvin or any of the other officers. And they did a deep dive on these guys, let me tell you. But we're just going to assume, because it's understood that it was racial in nature. Is it because it was that Floyd was black and Chauvin's white? I mean, to me, it seems pretty racist that people would assume racism in this account, in this incident, when there was none, just because of the skin color of those involved. That's racist. Sorry, guys. And again, absolutely nothing was ever introduced into this case that showed this was racially motivated. Nothing. Yet bishops and all kinds of lay Catholics, they jumped on that bandwagon though, didn't they? The arresting officer himself was black. 2 of the 4 officers, including the arresting officer, were minorities. Yet this was painted as a racially motivated attack by a racist white cop. I love that. But looking at the available public record and trial evidence, what we do know from the Derek Chauvin trial is it focused on excessive use of force, medical testimony, police protocol, and cause of death, and failure to render medical aid. You know, I just recently watched a documentary on this thing, and it's entitled The Fall of Minneapolis. I'll put a link to it in the description of this video. You have to watch it, because one thing that that documentary shows, is the actual body-worn camera video of all the officers involved that was kept from the public and kept from the jury, most importantly. People went off of one photo, one little video from a bystander from one specific angle that allegedly showed Chauvin kneeling on his neck, okay? The body-worn camera video, which is from start to finish, shows a completely different story than you've been told. Please watch that video. You know, and in getting back to the failure to render medical aid, nowhere has it ever been shown in anything I've read or any other video I've seen where 36 seconds into Floyd's fighting the police officers, they called for medical aid. They called for EMS to respond to the scene. Have you ever heard that? Yeah, me neither. I just found that out. And it's right there for anybody to hear on the body-worn camera video that nobody was shown. They called for EMS 36 seconds after they started taking him into custody. What the trial did not focus on was personal motivations or intent regarding race. Never even brought it up. From either side. None of them brought it up. But the bottom line is, truth doesn't matter when it comes to, the opportunity to virtue signal and to demonize yet again the police. The truth of the matter is, George Floyd died of a drug overdose and a pre-existing cardiac condition. Let me say that again. George Floyd died of a drug overdose and a pre-existing cardiac condition. Did you know that in the original ME report, there were no indications whatsoever of asphyxiation? But how many times have you been told he asphyxiated? No bruising or contusions on the neck or the back of George Floyd. None. Kept that out of the news, didn't they? Now, before you sit there and say, oh, this is just a cop defending other cops, please note that in my 30-year career, especially when I became a boss, I've arrested cops, and I had no problem doing it. If they tarnished the badge, if they broke the faith, I had no problem arresting these cops, one of whom was my friend. I consider the man a friend of mine. But what's right is right, and what's ethical, moral, legal, I had to make the arrest. And it broke my heart to do it because he is basically a good man, but I did it because it was the right thing to do. As a police officer, I have to make those hard choices, and I did it. So this isn't just, Chris defending cops just because they're cops and the whole blue wall and all that garbage, okay? What's right is right, and I'm going to say it. This is about truth, justice, and accountability, something sorely lacking about this subject over the last 5 years. And I'll say it again. Yep, racism is absolutely a very serious sin, and it should be rigorously condemned. But rash judgment, calumny, slander, those are all sins as well. And anyone, bishop or layperson, that engages in that needs to repent. And I'll go on with the article. The officer's indifference to Floyd's suffering was immediately understood as racially motivated. We already covered that. Ridiculous. That sounds like something you'd read in a high school newspaper. It's not worthy of a publication that's been out there for 100 years, over 100 years. I mean, it's ridiculous. That's so amateurish and irresponsible that they would publish a line like that. In the following days, horror and anger over Floyd's death, which bystanders filmed and shared online, bystanders, not one bit of the body-worn camera footage was put out there, was it? Led both to public large demonstrations calling for justice, as well as looting, rioting, and violence in cities across the United States. At least they Got that one right. At least they were honest enough to put that in there. In Minneapolis, demonstrators burned down a police station in the vicinity of Floyd's murder and set other fires in that city and in neighboring St. Paul, Minnesota. Governor Tim Walz called in the state's National Guard to restore public order. Yeah, he did that almost 24 hours after all this started. He sat on his hands for almost a full 24 hours before calling in the National Guard. Yeah, they're giving him credit for calling him in. Yeah. Floyd's funeral drew major civil rights activists, politicians, and celebrities. Who cares? Who cares? Of course these people are going to want to put their faces in front of the camera. I'll never forget the video of the mayor kneeling, touching the coffin and sobbing with his face mask on because, COVID and the whole bit. Even an American ministering as a bishop in Peru retweeted a prayer for Floyd, his family, and peace, originally posted by Bishop Michael F. Burbidge in Arlington, Virginia. That bishop in Peru became Pope Leo XIV, May 8th. Oh, what a line. What a line. Okay. So Pope Leo read the same garbage that was out there, and he published a prayer for him. Good. I prayed for George Floyd. I did. I prayed for the repose of his soul. Nothing wrong with that. And then there was some kind of Catholic racial justice coalition that was initiated. Okay, whatever. Goes on to say, Floyd's death received international attention with Pope Francis in the general audience once praying for the repose of the soul of George Floyd and all those others who have lost their lives as a result of the sin of racism. Again, Holy Father, if you were still here and I could bend your ear for a second, I would ask you, Holy Father, where is the evidence that racism played any part in the death of George Floyd? It was irresponsible, Pope Francis. The late Pope denounced both racial injustice and violent and destructive demonstrations. Well, that's good. Later that year, he drew attention to what he called the horrendous police killing of George Floyd in his book. Again, absolutely no evidence, but you're going to go with that narrative. Great job, Pope Francis. He also called Bishop Seitz to commend him for showing solidarity with people who were suffering. Of course he did. Of course he did. Speaking with OSV News on May 21st, the El Paso bishop said he prayed the rosary at that El Paso park for people suffering from racial prejudice and for peace during a local demonstration, blah, blah, blah. He did not join the demonstration itself. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. Perhaps he was worried that he'd get hit by an errant bottle or rock that was meant for the police. The killing of George Floyd horrified me, Bishop Seitz said. It was something that really caused all of us in the church to pause and say, is it possible that even today some lives are valued less than others? What was it in the heart of those police officers that led them to such a violent response to this black man? Watch the body-worn camera video. Those officers, they exhibited the most amazing restraint in dealing with George Floyd, who was kicking them, actively resisting, and screaming like an idiot. There were people, bystanders, not cops or fans, that were yelling at Floyd, stop resisting. One guy yelled, you're going to give yourself a heart attack. Stop it. No, but the officers, they were reacting violently to this guy. Give me a break. It was the other way around. Unbelievable. I think it was a moment in which we all had to pause and examine ourselves in a certain way and say, we have not come any further than this. Come on. There is still serious work that needs to be done to address racism, especially against people who are black and brown, said Bishop Seitz. Yeah, by other black and brown people, not by the cops. There is no other organization in the history of this country that is more dedicated to the belief that black lives, all lives, matter than the police. Okay? So Bishop Seitz and all you other prelates and lay people and reporters that want to sit there and paint a picture of some kind of systemic racism inside the police in this country, you're committing calumny. You're committing slander. All right? And it's time that it stops. Find out the real story and then go from there. Yeah, George Floyd's loss of life, of course that was tragic. Okay? It was tragic, but it wasn't because of the cops. It was because his heart blew up because of the drugs and his cardiac condition. Goes on to say, Bishop Seitz has been a consistent voice for immigrants and the marginalized. He pointed to other racially motivated acts of violence and said that in the summer of 2020, it was important to say Black Lives Matter. Now, just let's go into Black Lives Matter there for a second. You know, Bishop Seitz took the knee That's a Black Lives Matter organization thing. It was started by people who adhered to the Black Lives Matter organization. The term Black Lives Matter is inextricably woven into the Black Lives Matter organization. Those who try to say, well, you can say Black Lives Matter, but it's not related to the organization, bull, okay? Bishop Seitz, if he wanted to pray for George Floyd in public, why did you take the knee, which is, again, inextricably woven into the whole Black Lives Matter routine and rhetoric? Why didn't you stand there, maybe put a stole on, and read a prayer out of a book, as a Catholic prelate should do, not take a knee holding a sign with the name of an organization that is rooted in Marxism, racism, definitely racism, the occult, and the LMNOP ideology. Everything that is diametrically opposed to the Holy Catholic Church, you, Bishop Seitz, just sat there and promoted. That's disgusting, Bishop Seitz, and you should apologize and you should ask for forgiveness. And he goes into more of the stupid rhetoric, from, thinking that he's Dr. Martin Luther King, just talking all that high-minded stuff, whatever. But this is hilarious. This is so hilarious. Our Sunday visitor then goes and talks to, of all people, Gloria Pervis, who, if you don't know who she is, she's a disgraced former EWTN personality. She got so wound up in race baiting and lying about race and lying about other things regarding it. She's the kind of person where race trumps everything for her, including Christian charity. It was so bad that EWTN, which is not some kind of conservative firebrand, fired her because of it. Okay, but OSV, our Sunday visitor, is going to go and they're going to talk to her because she's black. Gloria Pervis, a Catholic media personality who is black, said that while many Catholic leaders and institutions took and continue to take important stands to denounce the sin of racism in the aftermath of Floyd's death, she has also heard racist rhetoric among Catholic influencers online that has gone unchallenged. Really, Gloria? Name them. Name them. It's easy enough to say it. I don't see any names. If I was going to accuse people of such a thing, you bet I'd name them like I'm naming you. You don't do that, though. It's so easy to just throw things out there like that. Oh, there's people that I've known or that I've seen that, they go unchallenged, racist rhetoric. You haven't named one person, Gloria. It's meaningless. Your contention here is meaningless. And she said, U.S. Catholics who are not black seem widely resistant to uncomfortable conversations about race or truly understanding that racism is a sin. Again, I think that's a racist comment, Gloria. How do you know the hearts of people, of non-black people? Come on. You know enough about the non-black people in the church to say that? Wow, that's reprehensible, Gloria. I saw a lot of disdain, really, for the topic, for saying, hey, this is wrong, or even for the expression of black people's righteous anger about this. We had the videotaped murder of George Floyd, and yet so many people who I know as self-identified Catholic pro-life people fail to see it as murder, she said, because it's not murder, Gloria. It's not murder. And again, videotaped from people on the street. You didn't see the body-worn camera footage. It wouldn't have changed her opinion of this because her mind is set. She's the one who wants to claim that nationally, it's like very, very, very few police officers are ever indicted for for any killings of people. You know why that is, Gloria? It's because 99.99999% of police officer-involved killings are justified. Police officers are allowed to use deadly force by law if it rises to that, okay? Now, I'm not saying this is what happened with Floyd. I'm just saying. But to her, anytime a police officer is forced to kill somebody or otherwise use force, they're automatically in the wrong. Especially if it's a person of a minority race. They're absolutely right off the bat in the wrong. In the months and years after Floyd's death, Pervis said, priests have preached ahistorical homilies about lynching, about saying that black people needed to be grateful to white people that lost their lives during the Civil War. Okay, I don't know. I don't know about that. But again, Gloria, it's so easy for you to level a charge like that and not name names. It's easy. I could do it. I've heard priests preach from the AMBO saying that they were abducted by aliens. I'm not naming names, but it's really easy to throw that out there, Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and say that priests have preached about being abducted by aliens. But that carries the same amount of weight as her charges. Come on. This is the thing that really, really gets me. I can't believe they actually published this statement from Pervis. And when Catholics in the pews said they could not stand with Black Lives Matter organizations because the BLM platforms did not fully align with Catholic teaching, Pervis said Catholics were holding that movement to standards of impossible purity to which they did not hold collaborating pro-life organizations and positions unaligned with church teaching. Some also did the same for black people, she said. Are you kidding me? Look at how she glosses over the fact that Black Lives Matter, again, is a racist, Marxist, occultist, LMNOP organization. Look how she glossed over that. That is just, if it wasn't so sad, it'd be funny. How do we go from recognizing or claiming we believe in the dignity of the human person from the womb to the tomb, and then being worthy of dignity and respect because they're made in the image and likeness of God, and that very basic teaching could not be embraced unless the person was seen as Jesus? These impossible standards, at least when it comes to black people, she said. I have no idea what she's even trying to get at there. Pervis knows black Catholics. Again, here's that ethereal, I know some, I'm not going to name names, not going to have any kind of specifics, but I'm just going to throw this out there. Pervis knows black Catholics who felt they could no longer worship at their parishes because the lack of empathy they perceived there made Catholics' profession of faith seem like a lie. I don't believe you. Based on your other statements and your other actions, I don't believe you. It's so easy to just throw these things out there, not name names, not be specific, but yet you think it proves your point. It's ridiculous, and it's pathetic. Over the past 5 years, Pervis thinks the issues around persistent racism in American culture, there isn't, and even the church. Let me repeat that. Over the past 5 years, Pervis thinks the issues around persistent racism in American culture and even the church were revealed and ignored. But what gives me hope is that I know the battle was already won. Okay. Then she goes into claiming Jesus Christ, her belief in Jesus Christ's death, rose from the dead, gives a chance. Okay, whatever. Okay, Gloria. You can't sit there and lie on one hand and then bring up Jesus Christ, okay, and bring up his death on the cross and resurrection to bolster your lies. That's reprehensible. So OSV goes on. They say a week after Floyd's murder, Cynthia Bailey Manns, a spiritual director and adult learning director at Minneapolis's parish, some parish in Minneapolis, who led a prayer service, a female leading a prayer service. Okay. In an interview at the time, she said that Floyd's murder reminded her of other police-involved killings of unarmed black men. I can only think of what she's talking about, maybe the Michael Brown incident in Ferguson, the thing that kickstarted Black Lives Matter. Unarmed does not mean not dangerous, okay? That whole lie that started the Black Lives Matter BS came from the Michael Brown incident in Ferguson, the whole hands up, don't shoot. You had news pundits all standing or sitting there on the set like this. That was proven to be a lie by the bystanders who hate cops, by the way, but actually told the truth and said, no, he was beating that officer badly. He was much bigger than the officer, and he went for the officer's gun. That's deadly force. And, that shooting was found to be justified. But they're going to say this again and just throw it out there as if it's fact, and it's not. Manns, who is black, they just have to throw that in there, was among 4 lay delegates from the U.S., the 2 sessions of the Synod on Synodality, where, of course, she brought up George Floyd's death. Okay. We are still healing from this, and we are mindful of the work that has to be done within the Catholic Church at large in terms of racism. There you go. Again, somebody else saying that there's racism within the Catholic Church. Okay. Including connections, listen to this, including connections between the U.S. Catholic Church and African slavery. Really? Including connections between the U.S. Catholic Church and African slavery. So apparently, OSV doesn't even know that one of their own writers, a guy named Steve Weidenkopf, he wrote an article for Catholic Answers magazine debunking that spurious, disgusting claim that the church had anything to do with racism. He wrote for Catholic Answers magazine. In fact, I'll put a link to his article in the description of this video. Apparently, one hand doesn't know what the other one's doing at OSV, but they're going to put this garbage in here. This article is just, again, it's amateurish, it's dishonest to the extreme, it's ridiculous and reprehensible. And then she goes into talking about the synodality and all this other, I don't know, but it has nothing really to do with anything related to George Floyd. Then they quote another bishop, Bishop Joseph N. Perry, an auxiliary emeritus bishop of Chicago, who leads the USCCB's ad hoc committee against racism. He's hopeful about the direction the Catholic Church is headed in addressing racial injustice, especially because young adults seem to take the issue seriously. The only problem is they're being led around by the nose by the CNNs of this world and the OSVs of this world and the Gloria Pervises of this world. They should really strive to seek out the actual truth of what happened. Racism is a sin, this bishop also says. No kidding, Bishop. It's a moral issue, he said. Skipping ahead, he told OSV News that racial bias in policing as well as economic disparities between race groups are important justice issues that must receive attention. And again, Bishop, where is your proof that there is racial bias in policing? You know, study after study has been done to try to prove that there's racial discrimination, systemic racism within the police agencies in this country. Can't find it. They can't find it. Yeah, isolated cases here and there. And guess what? Those guys are dealt with. And they're drummed out of the job by other cops. The bishop goes into, the typical high-minded, ethereal kind of gobbledygook word salad that some of these bishops are just so good at. We have this unusual situation that we worship on Sundays is separate. It's kind of illogical that we worship the Lord in a racial context that is routine without some, okay, all right. And then it ends with more of that gobbledygook from that bishop. One of the most seriously disingenuous things that I found out about the George Floyd incident was that he was using a technique called the maximal restraint technique. It's taught all over this country by police departments. Different names are used for it among the different agencies in the states or whatever, but it is a state-sanctioned police department tactic, what he was doing, holding Floyd down. And it's taught. They actually have the training manual that shows exactly what Chauvin was doing as being a certified, sanctioned use of force. But that was never introduced into his trial. In fact, they had police administrators, chief in fact, I think, get on the stand and lie about it and say, no, that was never taught to them. When it's right there in black and white in their policy manual. They have copies of the policy showing a sketch of how it's done, and they put it side by side with what Chauvin was doing. That was never allowed in trial, and it was never put out in the news. And again, I'll just reiterate, Floyd was actively resisting the whole time until he did die. And don't forget, the article says, an officer checked for Floyd's pulse, found none, but no officer gave medical aid. That's a flat-out lie. And if you watch this documentary, you'll see on the body-worn camera an officer doing chest compressions, actually doing CPR on George Floyd. Again, they called for EMS to respond 36 seconds into the struggle with Floyd. So don't tell me there was failure to render aid when an officer gave CPR and they called for EMS 36 seconds into the struggle. What also was never brought out is that EMS screwed up big time. They didn't respond for 20 minutes. The response time in that area was routinely about 3 minutes. And somehow something got messed up with the communications on the EMS and fire rescue side, and they ended up going to the wrong location or whatever. But meanwhile, Chauvin, I know what his thinking was. Let's just hold him here. EMS will be here shortly. We'll get him checked out. And Floyd ended up dying. Again, not due to asphyxiation, which everybody wants you to believe, not due to any kind of breaking of his neck. None of that was the cause of death. I want to quote. This is an exact quote from the medical examiner's report. No physical evidence suggesting Mr. Floyd died of asphyxiation. That was in the medical examiner's report. It then goes on to list a whole host of pre-existing medical conditions, including heart problems. Floyd had fatal levels of fentanyl in his system. And the ME report says, under normal circumstances, without all the resisting, the level of fentanyl was more than 3 times the normal lethal level. More than 3 times. Now let's talk about the state attorney general that indicted him on the state charges, Keith Ellison. Look into that guy. Look into him. He's the Muslim guy. He served in Congress for a little while for Minnesota, and he became attorney general. Mr. Ellison, well, he had quite the storied legal career before he went into politics, where he defended gangs. He was the defense attorney for gangs. He actually represented the Bloods, vice lords, gangster disciples, etc. This is the guy that allegedly is going to give Derek Chauvin a fair trial. He hates cops. He's always hated cops from day one. He's a gang attorney. He's actually on record as saying gang members are misunderstood victims. That's a direct quote from Mr. Keith Ellison. The original autopsy report was changed due to political pressure. So people, including OSV, they took the word of a gang attorney and following the narrative of the Floyd case instead of engaging in actual journalism or any kind of intellectual curiosity about the case. They just went with the narrative that the liberal media, who always hates cops and wanted nothing more than to sow racial and societal discord in an attempt to get Trump thrown out of office or, not get him reelected. That was all that was. They wanted to show that the whole country was exploding and that racial injustice was rife in this country and that we had to elect new people to get this taken care of. And people fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. But the jurors in the George Floyd case, they were all asked about their views on Black Lives Matter. And all of the responses of the jurors that were actually seated were strongly positive. Yeah, that's going to give Derek Chauvin a fair trial, right? A lot was made in this OSV article about justice and all that. But where is the justice in putting these officers behind bars, in the case of Chauvin, almost for life? Where is justice in a man not getting a fair trial? They tried to get that trial moved out of Minneapolis. Do you really think that a jury, not even a year later, after the city burned down, the whole courthouse was surrounded by razor ribbon and concrete barriers and all because of all the racial riots going on? Are you really thinking that the jury is going to sit there and see all this stuff and think, oh, we can vote for acquittal? Yeah, we could definitely vote for acquittal. Come on. They're going to find him guilty because they don't want to take their lives into their hands leaving the courtroom. This OSV article, it sought out race baiters, like the queen of race baiting herself, Gloria Pervis, the disgraced former EWTN personality, made such a big thing of finding black people to talk about the situation. Why didn't you talk to black people? If that's really what you wanted, just talk to black people instead of just anybody that has a different perspective. David L. Gray is a Catholic that has a different perspective on this and race relations in general. Didn't even think to talk to him though, did you? So I'm challenging all of those who have promoted that falsehood that race played any part in Floyd's death, and that's OSV, Bishop Seitz, any Catholic, lay or ordained. I mean, forget about the CNNs and the MSN. Of course they're going to lie. And even the more conservative outlets, they didn't push back on this narrative hardly at all because I'm sure they were afraid to be labeled racist and all this other stuff. So they kind of just let it go. They didn't do their jobs either. So I'm not giving them a pass. But all of those people, I'm challenging you to admit that you're guilty of rash judgment and calumny. And I mean, Bishop Seitz, you can start. Let's hear from Gloria Pervis. Let me challenge you all to watch the body-worn camera footage in that documentary. And they don't chop it. They show it as it happened. And yeah, they have interviews with everybody involved and the police officers, other police officers and stuff, and the Chauvin and the other officers who were indicted. But it's not slanted, okay, toward any one side. This is a documentary. It's pretty much right down the middle. And I just want to say too, as I wrap this up, I reached out to our Sunday Visitor, the Florida Catholic, the editor of the Venice edition, the Venice Diocese edition of the Florida Catholic, and the Diocese of Venice themselves to voice my disgust with this. I didn't get a response from any of them, not one of them. And again, I'm going to put a link in this video to Steve Weidenkopf's article debunking the garbage claim that the Catholic Church had anything to do with slavery. And I'm going to put a link to the video, The Fall of Minneapolis. And I just want to end by saying I can't believe that I had to make this video. I really thought, maybe naively, that wokeism and all that had at least, and I know it'll never go away, but I was thinking maybe it had lessened in the last couple years, especially since, Trump got elected and a lot of Catholics helped him get elected. I thought maybe people were turning away from the woke thing. And I guess it was naive of me to think that. So I couldn't sit by and not address this. This was the most reprehensible article. Again, it was amateurish too. It was amateurishly written. It seemed like a high school kid wrote this thing, and it's just horrible. So I wanted to put that out there. I'm so curious to hear your take on this. Please, and I'm going to put a link to the article itself. Feel free to read that article for yourself. Let me know what you think of this. I mean, am I just all wet here, or is this a really bad article? And I would suggest too, let's pray for the Gloria Pervises out there who are so blinded by racism. It's really sad, that she spends that much of her energy on made up things. And, she's obviously a very angry person. So let's pray for her. Let's pray for all the others that have bought into this narrative and want to keep the racial divide among us. And Padre Pio, Ora pro nobis.